let's talk about the political rise of Aaron Burr. So, Burr, young man, his father, Aaron Burr Sr., runs Princeton, at the time known as the College of New Jersey, passes away a few years before the war. Burr graduates, becomes a lawyer, and almost immediately, still as a very young man, joins the fight, fights with the Continental Army, joins Benedict Arnold's trek through Maine, where it was a very harrowing time, and they had to eat Henry Dearborn's dogs. I don't know if Burr was one of those people. Truthfully, the officers probably had better food. Makes it through. He's fortunately not captured at Quebec, but suffers through that travesty. By the end of the war, I wouldn't necessarily call him a war hero. It's not like people everywhere knew his name, but the people of New York knew who he was. He falls under the guidance of one of the gentlemen, a former revolutionary whose name is eluding me now, but an important leader in New York. I want to say, was it I don't think it was John Moore and Scott. Oof, it's bugging me. It wasn't John Moore and Scott. It might have been Alexander McDougall. I think it was Alexander McDougall. Don't quote me on that. But Burr falls under this guy's guidance. He is learning a ton from Aaron Burr. Burr learns a ton. He gets elected to local government in the 1780s, proves himself to be a very good lawyer, and then at the point when the Constitutional Ratification Convention is called together, that's when Aaron Burr kind of makes his mark. And in the Broadway musical Hamilton, they say, Burr, what do you stand for? Blah, blah, blah. And it's not that Burr didn't stand for anything. He was very good at being moderate. And that's why he ascends so quickly, is because he ends up being a moderate in a swing state of New York. So when the call for the ratification convention comes in, Aaron Burr is actually nominated as an anti-federalist to go to the ratification convention. Now, don't let this surprise you, because the ratification convention had many anti-federalists. In New York, it was something like a 46-10 anti-federalist to federalist majority going into the ratification convention. Now, a week before the vote for that, Aaron Burr publicly says, I don't want to run for this office. There's been a mistake here. Please take my name off the ballot. Which was probably wise, because that way, when the vote happens, no matter what happens, he can say, no, I was never an anti-federalist, don't worry about it. Though, he had been associated with the anti-federalists, so he could claim to be one, depending on the outcome. Pretty wise political maneuver. So, Burr stays out of it. The vote is had. It's interesting because what I've read, not only within this book, but through the Anti-Federalist Papers, they go through it in this a lot, which I know is hard to read because it's super white. But the Anti-Federalist Papers we've been discussing with Herbert J. Herman Storing. This is the Federalist Papers. That's why it's right. I grabbed the wrong book. Herman, behind me somewhere is another white book with the Anti-Federalist Papers, where they talk about how had George Clinton, for whatever reason, the governor of New York, decided to have the ratification convention later in the year, in the summer of 1788. If he had it in like February, then the Anti-Federalists would have voted the Constitution down, which meant Virginia might not have voted for it, and several other states might not have voted for it, and there's a good chance that the Constitution would have fallen apart. But they wait long enough in New York, for whatever unknown reason, that by the time they have the vote, word comes in that first, New Hampshire becomes the ninth state, and the Constitution becomes government. And therefore, it's no longer, do we unite with the other states into one union? It's, do we join this now existing union that has territory on both sides of us? And then word arrives that Virginia, by a very slim margin, also ratified the Constitution. So now there's 10 states, including the most powerful state, and New York feels forced to vote for the ratification of the Constitution. On top of this, few months go by when it's time to send electors to vote for President of the United States, which everyone knew would be George Washington. New York, the Anti-Federalist State Assembly, is in such disagreement with how to choose electors with the state Senate, which is heavily Federalist, that They don't even send electors, and New York doesn't even vote for George Washington. They don't vote for anyone because there's such disagreement, there's such anger about this, that the Constitution, they felt it was forced upon them and it was snuck through when they weren't really paying attention. Anyway, Washington does not, not Washington, George Clinton and the Anti-Federalists don't care for this. And this is where Aaron Burr comes in. He was kind of out of it, and he was kind of a moderate. He was friendly with Alexander Hamilton, but he was also friendly with George Clinton. And New York had a weird thing going on at the time where they had the state council. State council was the governor and 4 other people, and those 4 other people could only hold their position for 1 year at a time, 1-year term limits, and they were voted on from within, if I'm not mistaken, the assembly would vote on senators from their district. There were 4 districts in New York. It was broken apart, and you would choose from your district who would go where. Now, because of this, Clinton could pretty much appoint whoever he wanted to. And an opening happened in Attorney General. And he wanted to get someone who, first of all, he knew would pass from both the Democrats and the Federalists. While he could pretty much force anyone on that he wanted, he didn't want to take that risk. And Burr was that guy. Burr had already been associated with Robert Yates also. And Robert Yates ends up becoming more important, but was one of the gentlemen who was working for Clinton, went to the Constitutional Convention and left early and wrote anti-Federalist papers. He was probably Brutus. I've heard disagreements with that, but he was probably Brutus, while Clinton was probably Cato. And they decide, okay, the best thing to do is get this Burr guy in here. He's quiet. Now, at this point, Burr was basically known for bringing really progressive things to the New York State Assembly. He's the one who brought a bill to the table saying that women should have the right to vote. Imagine that. Aaron Burr, great guy. So he is brought in as Attorney General of New York State during the time of transition to the new government. And it's during this time, Burr writes a really long piece that he brings to the state government on how to improve the code of laws across the board. He basically analyzes all of New York's rules and laws and discusses, hey, I forget the exact title of the paper, but it was essentially like, this is how we change it from Old English colonial New York to the state of New York under the federal government. And this was really impressive. He got on a lot of people's radar at this point. And then that's why he is set up to become a New York State senator. He is seen by the Democrats, the Democratic Republicans, as moderate, their guy, a Clinton guy, because he was Clinton's attorney general, but moderate enough where the Federalists wouldn't put up too much of a fuss, despite the fact that he was replacing Philip Schuyler, who was Hamilton's father-in-law, as they discuss in the popular musical. Now, Hamilton and Schuyler are not super happy about this, but keep in mind, Hamilton had just essentially rammed the Constitution down New York's throat, despite the majority of New Yorkers not wanting it, and then he went and became treasurer of this new government, and then he assumed all the debts and gave this new government an immense amount of power. He was also in the process of starting several banks, including the Bank of New York, and would soon return to start the New York Stock Exchange and leave his old position after he accumulated all that power for it. So people were not happy with Alexander Hamilton in New York, and even not happy with his father-in-law Schuyler. But Aaron Burr was seen as a guy that, even though they were replacing Schuyler with a Democratic Republican, Burr wasn't super tied to the position. So Burr goes down to Philadelphia and takes over as a United States Senator.